Hey, welcome back to another interview with one of our clients from our Pumping for Working Moms program. My name is Allison Tolman. I'm an LPN at IBCLC and a breast pump expert. I'm also a coach inside of our coaching program that we have today. We're going to be talking with Whitney, who has a really fun story to share with you. I know you're going to resonate with a lot of things that she's going to share with us today. I want to give you a quick introduction to her, and then we're going to bring her on and chat with her. As we're talking today, if you find yourself resonating with a lot of the things that Whitney's saying, if you want some help, if you want someone to hold your hand and guide you through this process of going back to work and not only managing your milk supply, but also feeling in control and having a balance in your transition, let us know. There'll be an application link down below for you, and I'll put it on the screen a couple times as we're going along here too, okay? All right. So Whitney is a pathologist by day and a 24/7 first-time mom to a 12-month-old. I think we can all relate to that. She conceived via IVF, and her son was born a little early at 38 weeks. And then they had some complications postpartum, preeclampsia, which I know it nothing ever goes as normal, and that was her case as well. Through the last year, and a lot of this has been since we've been working together, she has really been through it all. She returned to work at 10 weeks postpartum. She moved house multiple times. Her baby had sleeping adjustments, introducing solids, travel, sickness. But she was able to navigate all of these obstacles with confidence just by understanding how her unique milk supply works. So I'm going to bring her on and we're going to chat with her. Welcome, Whitney. So glad to have you here.
Yep, of course.
So I think the first place I want to start with you is why did you even want to breastfeed in the first place?
Yeah, so I'm an older mom and in my late 30s, and I didn't even know if I wanted children. And then once my husband and I decided to have children, I, more than him, am a big researcher. So I kind of like dove into all the research, first read a book about deciding kids or not kids. And then it was kind of like research on C-section or vaginal delivery. And I was born in the 80s, and I was like, if I ever had a kid, I would have a C-section. I would bottle feed them because that's what everyone in my family did. And that's all I've ever seen.
Yeah.
No one breastfed. I tend to be, Allison had mentioned I'm a physician. I tend to be, I am a physician who believes in science, obviously, but I tend to be like a little bit more on the, like, let's do things naturally as much as we can with fewer interventions. And so reading about breastfeeding, it was like, well, that makes logical sense to try to feed your baby the milk from your body as opposed to, artificially created formula. That has to work sometimes, but like if you have the option, I was like, I would love to breastfeed. So I took breastfeeding courses. I was reading breastfeeding books. When I was pregnant, just to kind of prepare myself for breastfeeding, I bought all the supplies, half of which I never used, but just to kind of prepare myself because that was my goal to breastfeed. And I had a doula during labor, and she was very kind of pro breastfeeding, so that was very helpful as well.
Good. And so was it just through the research that kind of made you decide, I want to try this, I want to do the natural way? I don't know, no one else in your family had ever done that. Was that kind of scary to go into?
Yeah, I knew nothing about it. Like I had no, like, everyone in my family says it hurts. And they still ask me that, like when I'm nursing, does it hurt? Does it hurt? I'm like, no. And so all I had heard was that it hurt. And no, I hadn't experienced it. Thankfully, my mother-in-law, she nursed 3 children.
Okay.
And my sister-in-law nursed 2 children. So I kind of had that influence of like, this is what we do. Can be part of your norm. And they had no kind of hesitations or anything about it. And so for me, it just seemed like it logically and scientifically made sense. So it was less of a hurdle to overcome as to doing it. It was like, this makes sense. It's less expensive. It seems more convenient. And there was always that small bit in the back of my head, like, I don't even know what I'm doing. Like, how do you even do this? Like, I guess you just nurse and you do it. And so there was that kind of reservation of, I don't know how to do this skill, but my husband, he's a very practical person. And he said, people have been doing this since we've been in existence. So I'm pretty sure that like you can maybe figure it out. So I went with that.
Okay, thanks for that. But
Yeah.
it's so funny because the culture and family dynamics were different until the last, 100 years. Like families stuck together, women helped women. So like when you gave birth and fed babies, you had your mother, your sisters, your aunts, your grandmothers, like everyone helping you. And like, we don't have that now. So I know people have been doing this for a long time, but our current culture is so isolated and alone where that didn't used to be the norm. If you couldn't breastfeed, somebody wet nursed your child, like a sibling or a
Yep.
aunt. Like that was just normal. And so funny to see how things have changed so much, even in the last 150 years.
Yep.
Crazy. Okay. So got breastfeeding off to a good start. What was it like transitioning back to work for you?
So yeah, so baby latched within the first like literally seconds of life. And actually I had
Awesome.
an OB. I had midwife care through my pregnancy, but my midwife was busy when I was like, I have to push this baby out.
Of course.
So the OB hospitalist came in and the baby latched and she's like, well, don't latch too soon because you know, he might do it wrong and then you'll get stuck with a baby who's not latching properly. But we went home from the hospital, went back to the hospital for a week. I had preeclampsia and we nursed kind of through that time, which was great. And then I was like, okay, I have to go back to work. Now what do we do? And I am definitely a person, which Allison has experienced this with me, where I just get anxiety about not having enough or not like
Sure.
being prepared enough. And so going back to work, I was like, okay, well, I need milk. I thought I had to have this giant freezer stash. And I was like, well, when am I supposed to pump if I'm feeding this
Yeah.
baby every 2 hours? Like,
Mhm.
how does that even work? And I was watching some of Allison's videos, and she's like, you don't need a giant freezer supply. You literally need enough milk for the first day back at work. And I was like, that doesn't make sense. I mean, I guess, but like, what if then at work I don't have enough milk? And then I go to, and then I was like, okay, no, just follow what she says. So I would pump maybe like the 4 weeks before I went back to work. I went back at 10 weeks. I would pump in the morning and get like an ounce or two and just kind of freeze that. So yeah, I went back to work at 10 weeks, starting a new job in a new
Oh
town.
yeah, I remember. Oh my gosh. I'm like so confused at where you lived and worked at these timelines because you changed so much. It's
Yeah, it was crazy. I
crazy.
moved at 9 months pregnant. Then the baby was born early. And then I went back to work at 10 weeks just because my new job was
Yeah.
starting. So it was like, okay. And pumping went well. So my plan was to go in and pump every 3 hours. That was kind of my plan. And I brought my Spectra originally and then use a Pumpables Genie Advanced to kind of have a little bit more mobility. But like I preferred to pump at my desk if I could. I would sometimes use wearables, but I just found it uncomfortable wearable themselves, but people asking like, oh, what's that? Or like looking around. And then I'd have to be like, I'm pumping because they're trying to find the sound. It's not that loud,
Right.
but you can
Yeah.
hear it.
Is the
Yeah.
copy broken?
Yeah. And I'd be like, I'm pumping. And then
Mm.
sort of older women would be like, oh, that's so cool. You can do that now? I'm like, yeah, you can pump and do whatever you want. And so I would pump every 3 hours, which worked really well. And that was for the first month of work. And then I had my first vacation for a week and I just was feeding at the breast. And I was in a couple other nursing groups on Facebook. And I started to get a little bit of anxiety like, okay, well, is my supply still going to be there? I can't see what's coming out. And they were like, don't worry about it. It'll be fine. So I went back to work after that week. And my first pump Monday morning, it was like half of what I had been pumping.
And you're like, oh my gosh.
And I'm, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And so my first instinct was just pump more, like
Yeah.
supply and demand, pump more, get the more milk out. So I was pumping like every hour and a half. I was like, I have to get this milk up. I have to see the milk coming out. And I went back to that group and I asked the question and they're like, all you need to do is give baby what you pump. I thought, yeah, but it's not enough ounces to
Yeah.
it's
Mm.
and so I had watched her videos and I knew the concept of like when you're mixing direct feeding and pumping, it's a difference than direct feeding or pumping exclusively. And I was like, I think for my body, I have to empty a certain number of times per day to be able to have enough milk for my baby. And so I had heard about your group. You always mention it kind of in your videos, and I was like, I have to join the group because I can't do this on my own.
Yeah.
Facebook is not individualized enough to help
Mhm.
each individual person. The advice I'm getting doesn't sit well with me, so I'm going to go with my gut. And I was like, I'm going to join the program.
It's hard too because people on Facebook are kind of sharing their stories, but it's really hard when you have such a limited view. Like you're only working with what's worked for you or like someone that you know. So it can be really hard to get advice from people that are only going off their own experience because
Right.
everyone is so different. That makes total sense to me. Yeah. So when you joined the program, what was that transition like for you? Did you find immediate success? Did it take a little longer? Tell us a little bit about
Yeah,
from there.
so I had the first intake call, and I remember like getting off that call, and I went downstairs to my husband. I was like, I felt like a sigh, like just a wave of relief come over me, like because just the intake call alone is like, these are people who understand. We have similar goals, and even if I don't have the exact goals they had, they support whatever your goals are, and it just felt like a space where I could actually get the advice I need, have a supportive group, and it was small enough, and so I immediately felt like, okay, this is great. And then, as I mentioned before, I love research. So I dove into the curriculum. It was probably like a day or two. And I was like, done with it.
Doing it
Yeah.
all.
I was like, I have to go through this as soon as possible.
Mhm.
And then I kind of sent in videos to kind of check my flange sizing and do those things just to kind of reassure myself that everything was going well. And it was actually really helpful because I had been like using flanges that were more complicated than they needed to be.
Yeah.
And so I sent in videos of like the simplest setup I use, and you guys are like, that's great. Keep doing that. And you don't have to pump every hour and a half to maintain your supply. Like
Oh,
you can pump a number of times a day and not have to do this 12 times a day. So I went with your advice, every 2.5 to 3 hours. And my supply was pretty consistent throughout the first year. There were times where I got COVID or baby started eating
yeah.
solids, or he would occasionally sleep longer than 2.5 hours. And I say that because he's now almost 13 months and still does not do that.
Oh, dear.
And so I would get really anxious about like, do I need, like, I would feel fine, but do I need to pump? Because I know I need to empty 7 to 8 times a day, or am I okay waiting? And I know I asked like in a group call recently, baby's 12 months and he's sleeping a little bit longer. Do I have to wake up to pump? And you guys are like, you're good. Don't wake up to pump. And just having the confidence from the group to be like, this is okay. Like even now I don't pump at work. He feeds on demand and I don't worry, like, is there milk? Do I have enough? Because I know he's still getting milk. He's still content. So I think the program really gave me that confidence to understand my supply, know like when I got COVID, my first postpartum period came back at like 9 to 10 months. And I was like, and I have COVID. What do I
It was
do?
bad. It was bad.
Yeah. And I was just like, and I could just see my supply like dropped in half with the pumps. And I was like, okay, it's fine. It's fine. You just maintain the pumping frequency, even though baby's not nursing as much. Stay hydrated, and your supply will come back. And like little things, like when baby was sleeping a little bit longer, I got like a plugged duct, and just having the education of, again, on the internet, it's like heat, massage, beat up your breast, try to get that out. And it's like, no, that's not what we're doing anymore. Heat, ice, ibuprofen, lymphatic massage. And it was gone within like half a day, just by doing those things and having that education from the group and your reassurance that, yes, the supply from that breast will come back as soon as it's less inflamed. And then I could like preemptively avoid those issues. So if I felt like a hot spot on that breast, I was like, okay, more lymphatic massage, make sure regular emptying. I mean, the group was pivotal for me to really get to that first year with less anxiety. And I'm a very anxiety prone person. And so I feel like I probably could have made it without the group, but it would not have been an enjoyable experience.
No, not so much. Did you like the group structure? So what we do in our program is more of a group-based coaching. So there is individualized support, but it is kind of within the context of a group of working mom. You all are doing the same thing. That's why we have application calls so that we can screen everyone that comes in, make sure we actually have what you need and that you'll work in our community there. You mentioned struggling with Facebook groups and communities. Ours is not really like a Facebook group. It's not how it works. But did you enjoy the group aspect of it, seeing other working moms doing what you were doing?
Yeah, at first I was like, I'm not so sure about a group. Like maybe I want to work one-on-one with an IBCLC. And then I was like, well, it's part of the group. So you're going to decide if you like it or not. But the group calls, like, I really like the structure, the community where you can post anytime. You guys always reply. Other people reply. I really like that structure, especially because the group calls, they're not ginormous. Like the Facebook group I'm in, I don't know. I think it has probably like 20,000 women. Like there's just a lot of people. And so there's no way that and like you see the same names kind of in most groups where like a handful of people kind of comment the most. But it's not individualized. There's no face face-to-face interaction. And I really enjoyed that. I kind of like the fact that like everyone's tuning in from work and people are tuning in and there's like other kids in the background or people are nursing. And it was like a space where I felt, oh, I need to pump during that time. Oh, whatever. I'll just pump during that time. Like
Totally.
no
We
one
have
was there.
people lined up with their pump breaks all the time. It's kind of like around a lunch hour-ish,
Yeah.
depending on your time zone. So everyone comes and they're like, I pump during our call, you know, and it's
Yeah.
so fun. I love it.
It just felt like people were doing the same things you were and like people chiming in, my baby's starting solids. How do you do this? How do you do that? And just the reassurance of things that I think for me, again, being a physician, it's not, there's a time and place, I think, for kind of modern medicine but I try to leave it in that time and place. And I think that the group was very supportive and validating in things that I preferred to do that maybe my friends or my colleagues or my family didn't prefer to do. Like one thing was co-sleeping. Like I never thought I would co-sleep because
Right.
you don't
As
co-sleep.
a nurse too, I was like, I will never
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah, baby on the back in the bassinet, but
Totally.
then you get a baby who doesn't sleep in the bassinet. And my husband and I, we had no other
Right.
option to get sleep. We were both delirious. It was maddening. And our baby would sleep if he's touching a human. He's the same way now. He will sleep if he's touching a human. He will only go to sleep if he's touching a human. And bless his heart, that's who he is. And our lovely sleep consultant she is like, that's who he is. You're not gonna be able to put him down and go to sleep and just walk away, which is fine. But again, it's like the group really validated that yes, co-sleeping, you can do it safely. You are an intelligent person who does your research, who's not going to put your baby in harm's way. And this is safer for everyone, because if you're just completely sleep deprived, that's not safe for anyone. So I always joke, like my baby has the breast milk buffet all night.
Yep.
And he still does that. And again, it really helps him. He had colic for 5 months and he's still a very sensitive child. And when he's upset, I offer the breast. And again, many of my friends and colleagues, they don't do these things. And they're kind of, now he does like the gymnastics and he's all over the place nursing. And I have friends who are just like, no, I would have cut him off like months ago. And it's just nice in the group where other people, you can see their kids right there doing it. And you're like, okay, that's fine.
It's normal. It's so fun to hear the different experiences. And I feel like our group tends to be like high achieving, researched women, like kind of like you. It's full of a lot of people like that. But it's fun to kind of be in that space with other educated women who are doing these careers. And even hearing you that you're still co-sleeping with your little one past that year mark, I remember walking through those safe sleep standards with you and like pulling the research that we did have and then just kind of helping you make a decision that felt good to you, because I don't really care as long as things are, safe and fine for you. But for other women, they go back to work and they're like, I cannot. This baby has to get out. How do we make this work? How do we protect the milk supply and balance sleep and things like that? And everyone's experience is just so different. And for us, it doesn't really matter as long as it feels good to you and it's baseline safe. I think there's only been a few times where I've had to say, what you just suggested is not in line with safety standards that we need to, not you specifically, but in our coaching program, but it's fun. I love the same thing. I love to see a lot of the different experiences that moms are having and kind of customize it to each person. You guys are all different.
Yeah. And I think my husband always jokes because I like to hire consultants.
Yeah.
And I will say that this program is one of the few that I've hired that's actually been worth the investment. But he always jokes, he's like, they're going to tell you the same things that you've already read and researched. And that's one thing about the group that is different, because everyone else's experience are not things that you can just read and research. Like you have to hear it from that person and you have to hear, their firsthand experience and what they did. And you can't get that just from watching your course because there's not enough time to go through everyone's experiences. So I think that's one unique thing of this program. It's not just a consultant. It's, so many other mothers' experiences, which are so invaluable. I mean, there's mothers with multiples and mothers doing all sorts of different careers. And it's just nice to kind of have that input from everyone. And I think we all kind of work together. And the other thing I really enjoyed was hearing people's wins. Like I
love it too.
didn't know any of these people before the program. And we're still just acquaintances, but I'll see like a twin mom trying to get her supply up and then she hits that 60 ounces and I'm just like, oh my God. I'm like, I didn't know her.
But you did it. I'm so happy. I know it's so hard. Yes.
Yeah.
Did you feel like you were still able to get personalized one-on-one support even in a group structure like that?
Yeah. So one of my voyeurs is like, I'll log on to the call and it'll just be like so many people with so many questions and there wouldn't be time for people. And it was never like that. Even the days where there were more people on than usual, you guys always take the time and you're like, if you have extra time and you can stay on a little bit longer, you'll stay on, or, message us in the community and we'll get back to you, when we have time this afternoon. So I never felt like there wasn't enough time for everyone to ask their questions. Most questions went, I feel like it's like therapy where you go in and you're like, I have nothing to talk about. And then you come out and you're like, oh, I had a lot to talk about.
Right.
So like say one thing and then you guys will be like, well, how are you feeling about that? And you're like, oh, okay, that's deeper than I really thought it was. I think this came up with, I had anxiety about my freezer stash, like using it. And you're like, well, let's dig a little deeper. And so I think that I never felt uncomfortable speaking up in the group. And I say this as like not the most extroverted person. I'm pretty introverted. I don't usually like to put myself out there. But I never felt uncomfortable asking questions. And it's a very, like, you just type your question in the chat, raise your hand. I've never seen anyone like not have time to ask their question. In the community, you guys always respond super fast. Like people are like, oh, by the way, I'm out somewhere and I forgot this pump part. What can I do? And you're like, do you have an old phone charger? Or do you like,
right? It's crazy.
Let's figure it out, or I can cut this and make this and put this together. So yeah, for me, being particularly an introvert, it's a very comfortable environment from the very beginning. I was like, this feels like a group of women I've known my whole life and I can ask them whatever and no one's going to judge you. And everyone is just always supportive.
And that means a lot coming from you because you did some crazy stuff over the last year. I'm pretty sure you tried to move a freezer stash multiple states over. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah. So through my pumping journey, my whole like pumping journey the first year, I think I mentally thought I was a just enougher. I had an oversupply, probably froze like 8 to 12 to 16 ounces a day. Mostly because my baby stays home with dad and he did a bit of reverse cycling. So he would kind of hold off on bottles during the day. He would have maybe 1 to 2. So that was like 3 to 6 ounces. And then he would just feed all night when I was home. So he got a lot from the breast and then everything I was pumping at work was just going into the freezer essentially. And so we literally had a whole freezer full and our freezer is like a giant, like built-in side-by-side, like not just a normal side-by-side. And then, I decided to get a new job and I was like, oh no, what am I going to do with all the milk? And I tried to give it away and someone didn't want it because I had a COVID vaccine. Personal choices is fine, but I just felt like, okay, well, I can't send it there. And I was like, what do we do? And our family lived close to where we were moving from. And the obstacle here was that we moved from Maryland to Ohio. So we could have just put it in the car and driven it 8 hours. But we actually bought our house in Ohio and then I had to finish work in Maryland for 2 months. So we were staying in an Airbnb, which did not have enough storage. So it was kind of like, do I just trash all of this hard work? And my husband was kind of like, well, you don't need it. And I was like, absolutely.
Yes, I
do. And I wanted to give it to him when he's a toddler, like through his first year and after. So what we ended up doing is we packaged, my mother-in-law came. Again, she breastfed 3 children. So she understood. She's like, absolutely not. That's liquid gold. You cannot throw that away. So she loaded up coolers on a couple of trips that she came to our house to help us pack. And it's currently in my sister-in-law's freezer. And my mother-in-law is visiting next week and she's going to bring it. So
it's like a 3-month process trying to get this milk.
Yeah.
But it was actually so fun to troubleshoot it with you because you're like, okay, here's what I'm doing. How do I do this? And we were like, okay, brainstorm time. Everybody, how are we doing this?
Right. And that's why the group is so helpful because it's like, at first I'm thinking, how do I troubleshoot this? Because I tend to be a very independent person. How do I figure it out? Like, what am I doing? There's other people who have done this before. Let's ask them. And you guys had such great ideas. You made me an awesome video recording of like things I could do, ideas I could try. And I had so many ideas that I was like, okay, we're going to get the milk to Ohio some way. And so it's going to come this week and the milk will be here. So, and we had a little test run. So in the Airbnb, because I had an oversupply, I was still putting milk in the freezer for those 2 months when we were back in Maryland. And we just had like, actually at work, there was a spare like styrofoam cooler sitting somewhere that I knew was trash, but someone just left it there. But it was clean. And I was like, I'll take this and just try and see if that small stash makes it. And it made it. So the milk will last 8 to 9 hours in the car. And I had just dumped like the freezer container of ice into the cooler. So it wasn't even that much ice, but the milk itself was so cold that it made it. So yeah, that was a very stressful thing. And the group was so helpful. You're like, no, we're going to get the milk, even like rent a U-Haul or, put a hitch. I even called the dealer for my car. I was like, okay,
we had some crazy ideas for you. Yeah.
I was like, let's put a hitch on. I thought I had a hitch on my car. And then I looked and I was like, I don't have a hitch on my car. So I called the dealer. I was like, how do I get a hitch? And they were like, that'll be $2,000. And I was like, okay, maybe one day, but it's not worth it right now. So funny. Yeah. So mother-in-law, she's going to bring it. She is the U-Haul.
It's so funny to hear you talk about your experience too, because even like you did have a little bit of an oversupply, but I think in your mind, it was still like, I am doing the bare minimum here. And just trying to manage the anxiety of a milk supply is hard. And to kind of hearing you talk about it, it doesn't really matter if it's too much, just enough, not enough. Like it's hard. There's a lot of anxiety that comes with that. Did you find anything to kind of help manage that or keep it in check?
I think for me, like when I got over maybe like 6 months, like the closer he got to 12 months, which is not a great way to manage your anxiety, I felt a little bit less pressure. But I think in having this, every obstacle I faced, like COVID or my cycle coming back, and I overcame it. It's like every other thing with anxiety. You're like, okay, I didn't die today. Like I can go on tomorrow. And I think so every time I realized that I was actively managing my supply, I was like, okay, I don't have to be so anxious. So if I had a pump that was like, strangely enough, some of my morning pumps are lower than later in the day. And I think that's because my baby eats all night long.
Yeah, yours was definitely a little backwards, but I think it was because of some of the habits of your baby, which again, like we can't just say you always get your biggest pumps in the morning. And if you
and so even that, it's like, the group really helped me where I didn't freak out in the morning where I would only get like 1.5 ounces when I pumped first thing. I was like, no, he literally fed all night long. This is all that's left in the breast. And so I think just having the skills to know that I was actively managing my supply, I wasn't just like, okay, whatever happens is going to happen. It was, I'm fortunate enough to have a situation with breastfeeding and pumping where I can actively manage my supply. And I'm very, very grateful for that. We always joke about my child's sleep issues and we're like, that's our problem, but nursing and pumping and breastfeeding has never been the problem. And I'm so grateful for that and the help of the group to make that the case. And just a reminder that like, if you're struggling with nursing or pumping, that like, that might be what you've been dealt and other people are dealt other things. And I think it's important to remind ourselves of that. Like when at 12:30 last night, when my baby would not sleep, I was like, this is the cards we were dealt, but he'll nurse. And so I think the group really helped me to feel like I'm managing this, even when I kind of weaned off the pump, which I didn't feel the stress with that. I was like, I can manage this. I can figure this out. I don't have to worry about clogs or mastitis or all these other things. There are strategic and intelligent ways to manage your supply. And so you don't just feel like, okay, I hope I have milk tomorrow. In the beginning, that's how I felt like, I hope the milk comes out.
I know. And it's amazing to watch, especially moms like you who are able to manage their milk, create a predictable milk supply is kind of what I like to call it, is where you can manage it up and down based on what you need. And sometimes when you say down, moms are like, why would you ever manage it down? But weaning from the pump is a thing too. And I know you just kind of went through that, trying to wean off of workplace pumping. Was that tricky for you to kind of bring yourself down?
Yeah. So fortunately, I ended the job and then we moved and I had 2.5 weeks off. And so I kind of used that as an opportunity to just try to, like my last day of work, let's see how long I can go without pumping and just let him nurse on demand. And so I think I probably went from like 3 to 4 pumps a day. And then I was able to go to like 2 a day because he nurses so frequently still. And I would just kind of pump when I felt uncomfortable, like if he's napping and it's been like 4.5 hours since I've expressed milk, I would just pump then, just so I don't have too much stasis, but I would just pump until I felt comfortable and not like the full 20 minutes. And then that was like a couple days. And then the next like 2 weeks, I literally just direct nursed. And then I started work and I was like, I brought all my pumping stuff and I had my Series Chill and it was all ready. And I did pump that first day. I felt like, but it was like at noon. So I pumped once and I came home and I fed him. And now I've been at work almost 2 weeks and I bring my pump stuff still. I don't know, it's still there, like just in case. I don't know what's gonna happen. And I still have that like in the morning when I'm leaving, I'm like, oh, should I put on my wearable on the way to work? I'm like, I don't remember the last time he fed overnight. Should I put it on? I'm like, no, it's okay. You don't need to put it on. It's fine. Like, I think it's hard. I'm a very habitual person, so it's hard for me to like break a habit, even if I know I don't need the habit anymore, which is a good thing, and it can be a very bad thing. But it's hard for me to kind of break that habit. And I'm like, no, your baby is fine. And I heard something a few days ago. I might have been in the community where someone was like, my baby's going to be 1 in 3 weeks. It could have been 3 days or something. And they were like, and I'm just tired of pumping. Like, I feel bad. And someone replied and said, you've literally fed a human for 2 years. Like, and I was like, oh, right, the pregnancy counts and then the feeding. And I was like, oh, I don't need to put that pump on this morning. Like,
you're good. Yeah.
So now I haven't pumped at work probably for 10 days. I still bring my supplies just in case and just make sure that I have that. And if I do pump a little at home, like if I feel like full or something, I just save it. And actually there was some milk in the fridge for probably like 4 or 5 days. And I said, oh, give that to Lucas today. And it had separated. The top was really creamy and the bottom was like that bluish color. And my husband was like, I didn't give him to that. It looked bad. And I was like, it's not bad. It's just not homogenized.
It's like, come on, man. Don't you know how all this works in biological essence?
Like swirl it around. So yeah, I'm basically stopped pumping now, which feels, it's like liberating. Like it didn't feel like the greatest weight when I was doing it, but it's still for a whole year, you are every 2.5 to 3 hours expressing milk. Like it becomes part of your life, but I don't think you realize how much investment that is. Like even now I wake up in the morning, I'm like, oh, I can just go work out. I don't have to pump or worry about which breast was expressed and which needs to go next. I can just go work out. So there's like this weight that's lifted that, you provided milk for your child, you can still provide milk for him, but you can kind of have a little bit of your life back.
It's crazy. I hear this all the time, and you can really only speak this way at the other end of it. It's really hard to articulate, like you said, when you're kind of in the messy middle of all of this. And I think, especially as women, we tend to have like this superwoman mentality of like, I can do this on my own. I'm already like doing it. I'm just going to put my head down and I'm going to push forward. And it's not always the best. Like you probably can do it. Like you're amazing. Like mothers are amazing, but there's often a better way, and getting some help and support to do it efficiently and to find control can really make a big difference. Like you still might have gotten to the same place, but it's going to feel way different, which I think is what you kind of mentioned earlier.
Yeah. I mean, I would have, with all of this, I would have just had so much more anxiety. And it's funny when my husband on the intake call, you guys kind of asked, like, do you have support of partners or family? And I said, my husband's kind of like, whatever makes her less anxious, we shall do. And so after the call, he was like, oh, well, what happened? And I was like, I signed up. I just have to sign up. He's like, okay, if you think it'll help, like I'm on board. And so I think even he realized like you can do it, but it would have been with so much more. I probably would have been pumping like every hour and a half and just been so.
That's crazy too. That is not sustainable, especially with a job.
Exactly. And that's the other weight that's been lifted is like my job is fairly flexible as a pathologist. Like I sit in a chair and look at slides, but it can be pretty busy and I have to run to the OR and things like that. And there's meetings and just the thought of kind of not having to, but getting to put the pump on again. And you're like, okay, I got to sit here. I can't, and I don't do well with pumping and working. So it's like, okay, I got to sit here and I have to like do some hands-on and I can't really keep doing my work. And so just not having to do that every 2.5 to 3 hours. Also my workplace they weren't not supportive. I didn't ask permission because, again, I'm a pathologist. I just shut my door.
Do what I want to do. Yeah.
And I thought that that would make it really easy for people to know not to come in, but that was not the case. And I would kind of put signs on the door like pumping, and people would unlock the door with a key and walk in. And then it was just uncomfortable. And I had one colleague who I could always hear her walk up to my door and she would just go, and then she'd start talking and like talking through the door. And I'm just like, and so just not having to like think about that 3 times a day. Yeah, that definitely adds the kind of the burden to it where, and I feel like people should understand pumping, but I'm not the kind of person who's going to be like, you need to respect me and do all these other things. I'm kind of I just like to smooth things over and not have too much conflict
and just like do my private thing.
Yeah. So I'm just like, I'll just finish pumping and then I'll just take the sign down. But yeah, so just having that relief and not being anxious, I think it was invaluable for me because I'm that person. I would have pushed and pushed and pushed and not slept and pumped every hour and a half and had like 3 freezers full, all for nothing and getting to the same goal.
It's so hard. Was it hard to take time out of your workday to pump? I know like switching mindsets can be really hard for a lot of people. Did you struggle to kind of keep those boundaries with yourself?
Yeah, well, I would set a timer, so that's how I always did it. So I use the Pump Log app. I really liked that app. I think it's designed for exclusive pumpers, but it worked really well for me and helps to kind of keep track of your stash too. And it has reminders and a timer. But I also set just my phone alarm, and like if the alarm went off, do not end it. It's a snooze. And it would just snooze sometimes for like 45 minutes. And I would like be talking to someone and I'm thinking like, okay, I gotta go. And I would definitely feel like anxiety then. Like I have to go. And again, I'm not the best at being like, I gotta go, just gotta go. And so I would just keep talking and talking and they would talk and I was like, I gotta go. And so I did find it hard because I'm a person who, when I come in the morning and I see my workload, most days, like when I work, I will sit down, start my work, and it'll be like 12 or 1 now. And I'm like, did I have water? Did I eat? Oh, I had to go to the bathroom 3 hours ago. I didn't get out of my chair. I remember in college, I would sit in the same tiny library and people were like, did you move today? I'm like, not yet. And so I did find it challenging because I would be like working through a case and then like the timer would go off and I was like, okay, snooze. And then it would go off again. And I'm like, okay, just pump. Okay, it's only 20 minutes. And like you try to rationalize and I was like, just do it. And then you kind of have to switch back into that mode. And maybe a procedure came up or it's meeting time or something's happening in the lab and I have to go in there and troubleshoot. So I did find it to be annoying, for lack of a better word. Yeah. And it was definitely, I remember talking to my aunt and she doesn't have children and she would I was talking and she's like, I'm like, it's just an obligation at some point. It's like, I just have to do this to feed my baby. And that's just where I am in life. And that was a struggle for me the whole first year postpartum. I think just kind of shifting identities, especially being an older mom. Like I had my son when I was 37. And so for 37 years, I did what I wanted to. And it was like, if I had a to-do list, the to-do list got done. Now, last night, my husband's like, why are you ripping backsplash out of the kitchen at 9:30? I said, because the child's cooperating right now. I have energy.
Only time to do it. Yes.
It's only time to do it. I know it seems weird, but and so for me, I think like it was frustrating because I had that to-do list. I had that work in front of me and I just had to stop and do this other thing. And so I think I definitely had to shift as a mom and be like, right now in this first year, my priority is to feed my baby. And I remember in the group, Andrea, one of the IBCLCs, she kind of said that you have to shift your priorities sometimes, that like you can't do everything 100%. And that's a big shift for a lot of overachieving women who are just so used to doing everything 100%. Yeah. And you have to be like, actually, I'm just kind of like 75% at most things right now, but I'm 100% at this breastfeeding pumping thing. And that's just what you have to kind of tell yourself. And when she said that, it helped so much because I used to be an athlete and I would work out hours a day. And now like I still exercise, but I can't do that. I can't, moms will say, just feed the baby, put him down and then go exercise. Well, you don't have my baby, clearly.
Yeah.
And And so I just had to shift. And like right now, that's not the season for being 100% athlete. And so I think the group really helped with that. But it's definitely been a struggle kind of with that to-do list mentality of like, I want to do my work, but I have to pump. And so you just pump in 20 minutes and get it done and shift back. But then again, like as soon as you're done pumping, you're like, oh, the timer went off again.
I just did this. What in the world? It's crazy. And I think you hit on a really good point that this whole experience really is about more than milk. You know what I mean? Becoming a mother is a huge identity shift. And it's not really like going back to work and getting back into the normal. It's like returning and finding the new normal because you're a different person now. And, you've had a whole life that you've built for 37 years and it all just got flipped on its head. And so to walk back in and expect things to be like they were, I think a lot of moms are thinking that's kind of how it is, but you have the same amount of work to do in the same amount of time, but you also are now lactating and have to deal with that. And your mental energy is all over the place because you're also caring for a human and it's just a new normal. And to be honest, it gets easier once you stop lactating. I will say that. And that now that but it's a constant, your life is different now and you're a different person. And I think a lot of what we do in our program, obviously we're pumping experts, but pumping is just a tool to kind of help you navigate this first year back. Part of what we do too is a little bit of life coaching in helping you find this new person that you are and hearing how being interrupted several times a day is a completely opposite from the norm that fits in with who you are as a person. Like you can sit for 12 hours in a library and do the thing. Being constantly interrupted is totally against your flow. So how do we make that work and find this new normal and this new person? And I think that's one of those, it can seem a little vague and out there, but that is a big part of what we do and why we have a long-term coaching program instead of doing one-on-one visits like a lactation consultant. Like, yeah, we're IBCLCs, but we're not really lactation consultants. We are coaches with an expertise in pumping, kind of just helping holistically you figure out this new normal and this new part of your life that it's different now.
Yeah. And I think it's helpful because again, I don't have many friends who have children that are my age. And so it's just like, there's not really a mom group there. And I have some friends who have children. But again, most of them are kind of working mothers and they're like, I don't have time to sit around and talk about milk. And so just having that group where everyone's kind of going through that macro sense of becoming a mother and like shifting identities or having children from before. And so they can speak to kind of, you will feel a little bit more like yourself at 1 year and maybe a little bit more at 2 years, but you're never going to get back to kind of the old person. You're going to be a different person, but just having the people to be like, yeah, right now you're in the thick of it and then it'll get a little bit better and then a little bit better, but you're always still in the thick of it. And you're still always juggling so many things. Like I'm sitting at my work. Okay, Lucas needs new clothes and then he needs this. And then we have swim lessons. Like, just like I joke with my husband. I said, I want a vacation and I don't want to have to think about feeding anyone.
Yes. Everyone take care of yourselves. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Isn't that the truth? It's a whole new world. And to be honest, I have 3 kids now. My oldest is 10. So I've been doing this for a while and I wouldn't want to go back. You just kind of I'm glad I'm not lactating anymore. I will say that. Sorry to anyone who's listening and is still in the thick of it. But that's why it's nice to have people who've been there, done that and can understand and can give you a more a broader perspective. And also I had a full night's sleep last night. So I'm firing on all cylinders here and we can kind of gut check these, ideas and plans that are happening. And that's a really, I don't know. I love the community and the group we've built. I'm glad that you found a lot of help and support there too.
Yeah.
As we kind of wrap up, is there anything you kind of want to share for working moms? Any advice you have, maybe advice you would have told yourself at the beginning of this experience? Anything at all that you think might be helpful?
Yeah, I think I feel like most people interested in the group are, again, like you said, like they like information, they like to figure out information. And I think for me, sometimes that's a downside. Like you think you can research your way to a solution all the time. And sometimes you listen to your intuition. Especially like I mentioned, my son had colic and there was advice from every which direction. And thankfully, like I mentioned, my husband's very practical and I'm actually a less anxious parent than I thought I'd be. I think maybe because I started to listen to my intuition with parenting and instead of other things. And it's kind of like, no, he's going to grow out of it. There's nothing we're going to hold him. That's it. And so I think listening more to your intuition, like get information, but listen to your intuition. And I think also it seems trite, like to say like, it'll be okay. But I definitely struggled the first year. I think it's been a lot better the last 2 months, but I remember those like month 2 and month 3 and 4. And I was like, what did I do? And how do I go back? And this is horrible. And
Hard.
I think I always joke that I was going to write a book that says, I'm not okay, but did you even ask?
Oh, please do that. We all need this book.
Because I felt like once that baby pops out, like when you're pregnant, it bothers me that people are like, all they care about is asking about the baby, but then they kind of ask about you too. But once that baby pops out, you cease to exist. And it's just kind of this very strange state of existence where you are like the sole caretaker. You went through all these things, and I didn't know anything about kind of like post-delivery bleeding, or I didn't even know breastfeeding was every 2 to 3 hours until I took a breastfeeding course. Like, I had no idea. And then, there's dinner to make, and then there's a house to keep clean, and there's, other things to take care of. And I think that first year, like I was never diagnosed with postpartum depression or anxiety. I think I tend to be a little bit stubborn, and I probably should have seen a doctor. But I think my big piece of advice would be to reach out for support groups like the program. Know when you're not okay. Like, I think I wasn't okay. And I, again, push through. And every day I would just kind of, okay, this is my existence, get through this day. And that's what I have to do. And I think finding the program actually really helped me in that regard, because I wasn't alone anymore. It just wasn't me and my baby and my husband, and our families are supportive, but they're not there all the time, and they don't live down the street. And I think it just really helped me to have that community to be able to reach out for support. And I think a lot of new moms feel hesitant to do that just because they don't want to be a burden, and they think the baby's the only one that matters. And my biggest piece of advice would be to check in with yourself. Everyone else is checking in on that baby. Like, check in with yourself. If you need to have a system with your spouse where you're like, today I'm not okay, and even explaining it to your spouse, I think it's hard for them to understand, or your partner, hard for them to really understand, like my husband be like, well, just give me the baby and just go. And I'm like, that's not.
I still have to deal with milk crap, and like I have so much to do. Like it's not
going to fix it. So I think just really check in with yourself. I just feel like the mom, and I'm a person, when I became a mom, I said, this is not in any of the books. I read so many books. I watched all the things. I listened to all the podcasts. And then you go to certain spaces on the internet, like Reddit, for example, and you look up something in the middle of the night, like, my baby's driving me crazy. And everyone is like, yeah, it's horrible. It's really hard. And I'm like, why aren't we talking? I mean, you don't want to like poo-poo the experience before people are parents, but I think that we should just be more open about that. And if we were, that moms and dads would reach out more. And so I just encourage everyone to just check in with themselves, check in with a trusted person, and just make sure they're doing okay. Because after becoming a mother, I'm worried about the mothers. I'm like, all these years I've been seeing these mothers around here, I don't know if they've all been okay this whole time, because I was not okay. And I see you with 2 small children and you're pregnant, and I'm not sure if you're okay. So can I help you? Like, can I get the one that's running down the street right now? And so I think that would be the main thing I would say for everyone. And that's from milk to anything, like anything in this kind of postpartum journey. If you need help with nursing or pumping, or your mood, or anything, to just check in with yourself, because I don't want anyone to struggle like I felt I struggled and I was alone. And I just don't want that for other people. And I think it's more common than we talk about, unfortunately. And I think that's partially cultural, and that, like you were saying, we don't have a village, and people are kind of just out here trying to be parents, and they have no examples. And so it's hard to kind of fix that. But I think if we kind of addressed it sooner than later and talked about it more, because I'm not the only person struggling.
Yeah. And I think you hit on so many good points there. But the big one that stands out to me is that you matter. Yes, you're keeping this tiny infant alive who's relying on you to do that. But the way you feel about this matters. And it's not just a fluffy, nice to have, like, oh yeah, in a perfect world, I would feel really great about this and I would be positive. I think it's really important to your sanity and to getting through this experience and to do it well, you know? I wish more people would reach out sooner. But honestly, sometimes, especially as a first time mom, I don't know if you felt this, but I feel like you have to kind of like get to a point where you're like, I can't, I'm done. Like, I've tried. I don't know. I'm done. It always blows my mind when we have first time moms join us like in late pregnancy or really early on. I'm like, you are amazing. Thank you for being so brave enough to realize that you need a hand for this. And then some people try until they hit that breaking point, and it's so much harder to get to backtrack stuff we could have
Yes.
earlier.
Yeah. And I think for me, that was like 6 or 7 weeks. I remember the moment I sat there and I just thought, what have I been through? What
It's a lot.
preeclampsia? Like, what is happening? You can't process it all. And then one day you do, and you're just kind of like, I'm done. And my husband's like, what happened? And I'm just like, oh,
You
I
don't
don't
understand. This is where you need other women to talk to. And oh my gosh, that reminds me, we get so many comments from partners sometimes that we're like, I'm so glad she joined your program because she needs someone else to talk to about this.
Yeah.
Not that like I'm super supportive and I want what she wants, but I can't fix this and I don't know anything. So I'm super glad that they now have, because I eat this stuff up. Like I love data, research, learning, kind of like you too. So I
Yeah.
love it when people come and say, here's all this data. What does this mean to you? Or here's what I'm doing. How do we fix it? Like this is where I live and love. And, I hope you write that book one day, because I think you have the same motivation that I did for even starting this program. Is I saw how hard it was to do it myself, and I failed and no one was there to support me. And I said, well, we cannot keep doing this. Other working moms need help, and especially high level professionals. Those are kind of the ones that tend to seek me out and join us, is because it's hard for you guys. You're seeing patients. I mean, like you're used to control, you're high achieving. And like you said, you cannot do this 100%. Motherhood is so hard. Whether you choose to breastfeed or pump or formula feed, it doesn't really matter. It is hard. And I think you're right. I think we need to be talking about that more and just kind of normalizing that this is not fun a lot of the time. But
Yeah.
finding the things that you do have control of and that you can make better is a really important part of the process.
Yeah. And I've never experienced someone else's experience, but I think just from what I've observed for other higher overachieving women, I think that where motherhood is uniquely challenging.
It's hard.
In the sense that it's not a meritocracy. You cannot work harder and make it work. And for me, that's just a very challenging concept. Like I remember my pediatrician said, you can't make someone sleep, poop, or eat. And I was like, that's all these creatures do.
That's my only job here.
Yeah. And I was like, okay. And so it's just like, it's so different than anything you've ever experienced. You can't work harder. You can learn more and educate yourself, but then, implementing it doesn't mean it's going to work for certain things. And I think we also tend to be people that take on everything. Like some people are like, why don't you offload some responsibilities? And I'm like, well, if I don't do it, then it's not going to get done. And if it gets done, then it's not going to be right. And they're like, well, you're kind of creating your own. I'm like, I know, but it's just who I am. And then you throw in the baby and all this other stuff. And so I think the group is just helpful because it's just a lot of like-minded people, where some people in my family would be like, well, why don't you just do less? And I'm like, why don't you just figure out who I am?
Yeah. Love me for who I am. I mean, yeah. Oh, we've had conversations like that with people where they're like, I'm overwhelmed and like, I'm quitting pumping. I'm like, okay, so tell me about everything in your life that's overwhelming you. I remember this one conversation and she didn't mention pumping in this list of like, so I had to kindly say, you can make whatever choice you want, but you actually didn't list pumping.
Right.
One of the things that was overwhelming you. So maybe how can we take some of these other things and offload? And she was like, oh, yeah, I guess I don't need to stop pumping.
Yeah.
Actually, that's like the easiest part. I have the most control there.
Right. The perspective is helpful, external perspective. And
gosh,
it's just nice to have such a group of people who are just so like-minded and similar. And I mean, it's been invaluable for my experience. And I probably will only have one child, but I appreciate the lifetime membership.
Just in case you happen to come back, we'll both grieve and celebrate the return of Whitney. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule today to talk with us. I feel like this was so helpful, and I hope moms hear you and take what you say to heart, because I think that so many other experiences are similar to yours. It has been an absolute pleasure to work with you, and you can hang out as long as you want. So,
thank you so much.
no rush to go anywhere. If you want some help, if this resonated with you, if you're struggling, there is a link down below. It's just newlittlelife.com/apply in case you're listening to this on the podcast. But we're here to help, and we'll do a call with you, just like Whitney said, an intake call, and we'll get to know you, see if we can help. And if we can, we'll help. And if we can't, we'll send you somewhere else. That's kind of what we do. So thanks again so much for chatting with us today. It was lovely. All right. Talk to you later. Bye.